You know the guy. Maybe you are the guy. Divorced 15, 20 years ago. Never remarried. Not because nobody asked. Not because he's bitter. Not because he's still hung up on her. He just didn't. And everyone around him has a theory. His sister thinks he's scared. His buddies think he never got over it. His kids quietly worry he'll die alone in that house with the too quiet kitchen. Everyone assumes the empty side of the bed is a wound that never healed. Nobody considers the other option, that maybe he looked at it clearly, once, and decided against it. On purpose, with his eyes open. Most men do remarry, by the way. That's the part people forget. More divorced men walk down the aisle again than divorced women, it isn't close. So the guy who doesn't, the one who stays single for a decade, 2 decades, the rest of his life, he's not the average outcome. He's the exception. And exceptions are usually more interesting than the rule, because something specific had to happen to produce them. He didn't fail to find someone. Men rarely fail to find someone. He looked at the option in front of him and said no. Multiple times, probably. And that's the part worth understanding, because it isn't the story everyone assumes it is. Here's where it usually starts. Not with heartbreak, with math. A man who's been married gets a very specific, very expensive education in what marriage actually costs a person. Not the wedding, not the ring, the years, the identity, the version of himself he built to keep the peace, to keep the house running, to keep everyone reasonably happy at the same time, which turns out to be a full-time unpaid job nobody hired him for and nobody thanked him for doing. He did it for years, maybe decades, and somewhere in the divorce, or shortly after, he got the invoice. He saw, clearly, for the first time, what it had actually taken out of him, and a very quiet, very rational part of his brain filed that information away for later. Think about what that invoice actually looked like. It wasn't one big number. It was 1,000 small ones, stacked up over years without him noticing at the time. The opinions he stopped voicing because it wasn't worth the argument. The hobby he quietly let go of because there was never enough time or money left over for it. The friendships that thinned out because socializing got filtered through someone else's preferences first. None of it looked like sacrifice while it was happening. It looked like compromise, like marriage, like being a grown man with responsibilities. It was only after, in the quiet of an empty apartment, doing his own laundry for the first time in 20 years, that he could actually see the shape of what he'd been carrying. And once a man sees that shape clearly, he doesn't forget it. It changes the math on every future decision that even resembles the old one. That's layer 1. The second layer is the part almost nobody says out loud, because it sounds ungrateful, even cruel, when you say it plainly. He liked his life after. Not the divorce itself. The divorce was hard. Most divorces are. But the year or two after, once the dust settled, once the lawyers stopped calling, he noticed the house was quiet and the quiet didn't hurt. He noticed he could make a decision, what to eat, when to sleep, what to watch, where to go on a Saturday, without running it through another person's preferences first. He noticed his money was his own. His time was his own. His evenings belonged to nobody but him. And the guilt of noticing that, of actually enjoying it, was heavier than the loneliness people assumed he was drowning in. Because loneliness is a story other people can accept. Relief is not. That guilt is worth sitting with for a second, because it explains a lot of what looks like avoidance from the outside. A man who feels guilty for enjoying his freedom doesn't announce that feeling at Thanksgiving dinner. So when a woman came along later, and for most of these men, one did, sometimes more than one, he ran a calculation most people never consciously run. Not do I like her? He usually did. The real question, underneath, was, is this worth trading my peace for? And that's a brutal question to ask about a person you actually care about. It isn't about her. It's about what marriage, as an institution, had already cost him once, and whether he was willing to sign back up for round 2 of the same deal, with a different signature. A lot of men in this position will tell you, if you catch them honest, that dating was fine. Dating was good, even. What scared them off wasn't a woman. It was the merger, the shared calendar, the shared finances, the in-laws, the holidays that now require negotiation, the slow reappearance of the job he'd already quietly resigned from once. He wasn't rejecting her. He was rejecting the return of a role he remembered too clearly. Picture the actual moment this usually shows up. Not a dramatic conversation. Something small. She asks if something's wrong, and he says fine, because he genuinely can't locate the word for what he's feeling in that moment, a kind of low, quiet dread that has nothing to do with her and everything to do with the door he can feel starting to close behind him again. There's a psychological term that fits here better than commitment issues, which is the lazy label people reach for. It's called loss aversion, the idea, well documented in behavioral research, that people weigh potential losses roughly twice as heavily as equivalent potential gains. A man who has already lost his autonomy once, and only recently got it back, isn't weighing the joy of a new marriage against staying single. He's weighing a known, hard-won peace against a possible future loss of that peace, again, for the second time. Framed that way, staying single doesn't look like fear. It looks like a rational bet, made by someone who's already seen how the other bet plays out. Now the part that actually surprises people, the twist under the twist. This isn't about avoiding intimacy. Most of these men aren't isolated. They have friends. Some have long relationships that never turn into marriages, on purpose, by mutual agreement, sometimes for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives. A woman he sees regularly, cares about, sleeps beside some nights, and never merges finances or households with. To an outsider that looks like commitment phobia. To him, it's the only version of closeness he's found that doesn't come wrapped in the old costs. Connection without the merger. Intimacy without the invoice. There's a harder layer underneath even that one. Some of these men aren't protecting their peace from a new partner. They're protecting it from themselves, from the version of them that shows up inside a marriage. Because a lot of men will admit, quietly, that they didn't like who they became last time. Resentful, withdrawn, keeping score. Marriage didn't just cost him time and money, it revealed a version of his own personality he didn't respect. And staying single isn't just about not trusting a future wife. It's about not trusting himself to not become that person again, given the same conditions. That's a heavier thing to carry than people realize, because it means the fear isn't really about her at all. It's about a version of himself he met once and doesn't want to meet again. A man who kept a mental ledger of who did what last. A man who went quiet for days over something he never said out loud. He doesn't think a new marriage would necessarily fail. He thinks it might succeed, and that the price of that success might be turning back into someone he spent years trying to stop being. Staying single, from that angle, isn't cowardice. It's a boundary he set with himself, not with anyone else. He gave up on love. That's the sentence people say at Thanksgiving, sympathetically, like it's a diagnosis. But giving up implies he wanted it and couldn't get it. That's not what happened here. This is a man who had it, studied it up close for years, and made a considered decision about what he was and wasn't willing to trade for it again. That's not surrender. That's closer to the opposite. It's someone who finally stopped performing a role he no longer believed served him, and chose, deliberately, to keep the peace he'd fought hard to get back. None of this means these men are right, or that everyone in their position should do the same thing. Plenty of second marriages are genuinely good, calmer, wiser, built on lessons the first marriage taught for free. This isn't an argument against remarrying. It's an argument against assuming that the man who doesn't is broken, or hiding, or still bleeding from an old wound. Sometimes he's just done the math nobody else bothered to do, and the number told him to stay put. If you're that man, or you love one, here's the honest version of the question worth asking. Not why won't he commit. The real question is whether he's protecting genuine peace, or whether the peace has quietly curdled into isolation somewhere along the way, because those two things can look identical from the outside and feel completely different on the inside, and only he really knows which one he's living in. I'm Gray. And this is the Quiet 60s, where we talk about the things men in their 60s actually think about, but rarely say out loud. If this sounded like someone you know, or someone you are, leave a comment. And if you're new here, subscribe. There's more of this coming.